I went over to the premieres 2 weeks ago to taste for myself, and that was actually before I'd done some of the analysis. Every year I go on Météo France, I download the actual weather data for Bordeaux, I compare it to the last 150 years, we get a chance to sort of see what's happening. And one of the drama of this vintage was really the first few months. I mean, this is a chart here of, this is a 30-year average of millimeters of rain in Bordeaux between March and June. That's what typically happens. And this is July to September. 2018, there was like a deluge of rain. I mean, at one point in late June, people thought, this is it. We're just like, build the ark. You know, here they come. And this, we have no hope at all for this particular vintage. Then in the last week of June, the sun came out, and it stayed out, basically 3 months. And what that meant is that if you could deal with the level of humidity in the soil and treat mildew, you could still possibly have a reasonable result. Now, did a little bit of research into mildew. As one does. So the downy mildew is the one that people are concerned about. It's a parasitic organism that are more closely related to algae. And because it is closely related to algae, downy mildew needs water to survive and spread. So you have this situation where water creates the conditions and then water accelerates the conditions, and you've got to seriously grapple with mildew. And this means for some people every other day treatments of your entire vineyard. So that, you know, that's cost, that's human activity, that's and then the interesting question is, what are the treatments for downy mildew? Anybody? Copper sulfate, right? Yep. Good. Mixed with lime, and then sprayed on the vineyard. So on one level you could say, well, no big deal, just spray on some copper sulfate, it's all still biodynamic. It turns out that this year, this biodynamic treatment of copper sulfate and lime was not strong enough to really cure the mildew problem. So what you had for people who were not committed to biodynamics, they basically came in with chemical fungicide in July, which is what you have to do to save the plants and get rid of the mildew. For people, and I'm proud to say people like Thomas Duroux at Palmer, they stuck to their biodynamic guns, and their yields are like 11 hectoliters per hectare versus 35 in a normal year. So they basically chose to take a hit, stay with biodynamic treatment and preserving their terroir for the future. And the same thing was true as Ponte Canet. So Alfred Tesseron was also committed and stuck with biodynamics. What intrigues me is this set of data that was first described about 25 years ago or 27 years ago by Bruno Prats, who said, look, Bordeaux is very simple. You look at the average summer temperature, you look at the rainfall during the harvest months of August and September, and for those years where you have high summer temperatures and low harvest rainfall, you have the chances for a pretty good vintage. So what do you observe on this chart about 2018. Yeah, the highest.
Even higher than 2003.
Even higher than 2003. And then the question, when you get up at that level of heat, as we know from 2003, how do you maintain the acidity? Because that's the real danger of overheating during the growing season, is you lose all the lovely acidity. But it turned out that in August, July and August, it was really hot and then the nights were cool. So the fact that you had cool nights on top of the hot days allowed them to preserve the acidity to make a pretty phenomenal wine. And I actually tracked this back. It's even a little higher than 1947 and 1893, which are the other high levels of heat. So just from these data, I got more and more intrigued about what they might have been able to accomplish. Here's the harvest rainfall. These are millimeters of harvest rainfall in August and September from 1952 through 2018. The lowest level of harvest rainfall. This is lower than 61 and all the other amazing vintages in the past. So again, based on the numbers, this is pretty interesting. And it's not just, I mean, there are a lot of other things that come into making your wine. For instance, at this level of ripeness, then you get a high level of alcohol. Then when you make the wine and you go through the extraction process, it's really easy to make an error and extract too much tannins, because the alcohol level itself adds to the process of extracting tannins. So I spoke to some friends who said, yes, we consulted a lot with our enologist, and normally we would pump over 4 times a day. But for this vintage, we only pumped over once per day and cut back on the time. As, yeah, serious change in behavior. And then as I began to taste through the different chateaux, the flaw that I found in, I would say, once in every 15 wines was high tannins, rough, over-extracted. So everyone had a chance, with this kind of weather data, everyone had a chance to make a phenomenal wine. And if there was an error, you could actually taste it pretty quickly in the premier tastings. This is the long-term Bordeaux summer temperatures, again, sourced through Météo France. And you can see where 1947 lay, where 1893 lay. Those are the historically warm. Where 03 is, if you're benchmarking 18, based on my, French weather data, frankly, highest ever in terms of summer temperatures.
150 years, highest ever.
Right, seriously high level. So there's also the general observation, if you start from 1954 and you look at the summer temperatures, you begin to see the Paris Accord, the increasing summer temperatures. I'm not sure what that says about the next 10 or 20 years in Bordeaux, but you may want to think a little bit about planting more Carmenère in terms of dealing with the heat, because I don't think it's quickly coming back. You also may remember that many chateaux were sold in the 1970s. So what you can see from this graph is what kind of economic pressure existed on the Bordelais as they were trying to make wine with really, really low summer temperatures. This is a segment of my spreadsheet looking at, and these are just Eric Vogt's scores. They don't count for anything, but for me, they are meaningful. I mean, anything above 94, 95, I'm going to look to buy.
And this will be available to us in more readable form on the Dropbox.
Absolutely,
Those look
absolutely.
like suckling scores.
Well, you know,
These were already sent to us.
I think these are from they cue me. I'm tasting these pretty quickly, obviously, with to do 125 in 3 days. But they allow me to make some distinctions between things that are lovely and things that aren't quite ready. And what I liked is actually there are a number of cru bourgeois who made it onto this list at 95. So it reminds us that in a year like 2018, a lot of people, if they're careful about their extraction process, are going to make some pretty interesting wine. Gavin Quinney, who's a great blogger and a entrepreneur, chateau owner, he described it, the 2018, as a wet winter followed by a soggy spring. The threat of mildew from spring was the strongest for decades. Hailstorms in May and July caused damage in some unlucky areas. There was more right bank, Côte de Blaye. Flowering worked well in May and June. Fabulous summer, preceded by just enough rain in late June and early July. 3 complete months of sunny, dry weather from early July through early October is exceedingly rare. And a number of people talk about this. They said September was a month where we could pick in any day we wanted to. We didn't have to rush. The rains weren't there. It was beautiful weather. We could wait for perfect phenolic ripeness and pick in that week to make sure we got optimal ripe fruit. Yeah, stress-free, no risk of rot in the harvest conditions. A vintage of great potential with outstanding reds and some very good whites. Balance will be key as alcohol levels are generally quite high. So I was speaking to this. Not only are the levels high, but in the winemaking it can lead you to over-extract your tannins. It is the 4th very good to excellent vintage in a row for the leading chateau. Plentiful yields for most growers, but low for those hit by mildew or hail. He's not calling out the biodynamic folks, but I haven't heard yet from Comte van Nijperg to see how they did. But it was clearly a challenging year for them. Overall Bordeaux volumes are close to the 10-year average, and that's how we think about it. The first major release of price was like 3 days ago, where Angelus, and we decided it was Angelus rather than Angelou at lunchtime. Yeah. So they came out at 295 euros per bottle, which you might look at that and say that's a pretty high price. On the other hand, I tasted it, and it's a gorgeous wine, along with quite a number of others. So that is the end of my summary of the 2018 harvest, remarkable harvest in Bordeaux, and would happily take any questions.
Well, just an observation. You can speak from personal experience that in June, you got soaked to the skin every day.
That's right. We were there.
We were there for the rain.
Right.
Yeah.
And they were all worried about the mildew. Everyone, from top
Totally.
to bottom, every chateau, all they could talk about was worry about the mildew.
Right, and they should. Other questions?
So it seems like it started out as a pretty dismal year.
A horrendous year.
And then what happened?
God smiled.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody's seen a year like this with the amazing level of rains, followed by perfect weather all the way through into early October. Doesn't ever happen in Bordeaux.
So a very unique vintage that was ultimately resulted in a chateau by chateau vintage, depending on hail.
Right.
Based on, so what really differentiated this in the long run? What maybe two things, this vintage, from quality versus?
Well, I think first is, with this level of warmth during the summer, you get phenomenal ripeness, which means you got to manage your level of alcohol carefully, which is a trade-off in picking. Do I wait and get pure phenolic ripeness and pick at a high level sugar content, or do I back up a week or two and pick at a lower sugar content so I end up with a more modest level of alcohol in the process? And then based on the alcohol I get, then what do I do in the extraction and the pumping over process to make sure that I haven't overdone and created harsh tannins? Like, what's not on this list are those that are down around, for me, 90 to 92, where mostly I think they missed in terms of extraction. And to me, you have in this list, you've got people with gorgeous tannins, really round, really approachable. You could take these bottles for lunch today. And then you have some people who made kind of coarse, harsh, over-extracted wines that may improve in the future, but certainly aren't there now. Jim.
There's similarities to 2003, obviously, because of the heat.
Yeah.
We have 15 years of experience now with 2003 tasting them. A lot of people thought that wine would never hold up because it had so low acidity. And guess what? It's still drinking great. I've talked to a bunch of winemakers who say, you know what? It's starting to convince me that you don't necessarily need to have that high level of acidity.
Interesting.
It's the tannins that in fact hold the wine together. And I think it's the same thing you're saying, guarding that tannic level, keeping your tannins fine, not letting them get coarse, that may be one of the keys.
Yeah, that's excellent.
When we had our 03 horizontal, man, you might remember this, we found that most of the wines were washed out, that only the best 03s were good. So maybe that was heat related or what, that was the consensus.
When you say washed out, what do you mean?
They didn't have much character, they were very bland.
No complexity, no body.
Well, it almost felt like they were overheated. That's how it tastes.
They may have been.
What we found in San Diego, we had the washed out experience. Our first Maître in our regenesis of the San Diego chapter just went nuts on the 2003 vintage, so we had a lot of it. And we came to a certain decision that, maybe 8 years ago or less, 6 years ago, we need to start drinking these 2003s because they aren't going to last. And then we had a dinner where they did taste kind of washed out, and we were further convinced they're not going to last. And then we had a commander, Parliament host, who said, I am going to counterintuitively to what the rest of us had concluded, including critics about the three, that the last thing you wanted to do was over decant these because they were already washed out. He said, I am going to decant these 3 to 5 hours before we serve them for dinner. And I was looking back and saying, Miles Grant, God bless him, had the courage to decant our 2003s more than anyone thought he should. And guess what? We discovered, wow, a regenesis of the threes. So, I don't know, Jim, how would you explain that?
Well, some, wines that have oxidative style sometimes tighten up, when they're exposed to air, they get, white wines in particular, they can get more clear. There is, I think some physical effect. I think the difference here is that, they had to harvest so early in 03, right? They had to harvest in the first week of August. Whereas here you had September, October harvesting. So you had the hang time, you had a whole different kind of dimension. But we kind of wrote off the 03s as well, and we have found that maybe we wrote them off a little prematurely. We might have been over-influenced by the critics in that as well. But that's an interesting observation, and I've tried, every once in a while, sometimes wines that don't show so well for a little while, I'm surprised how they tighten up, from hot vintages, with a little bit more decanting.
Why did they harvest so early?
In 03,
Because the ripeness was
Friggin' hot.
it was so hot, and they didn't have the rain. And then I think one other point, is one of the things that I've kind of heard more and more is that, and you have to look at the ability of vineyards to drain well. Is that if you look at the effect of the subsoil humidity temperatures, the best vineyards, and that's why the better vineyards are on the mounds or in the drain well, always do better. And even with all this rain, I think if you were in the right place with the right drainage, they can handle it. And I think what actually goes on in the subsoil, it's a major element of terroir that is still largely unexplored, how well the drainage capacity is in these big years.
To that end, make a note to taste the Mouton 2018 and Le Petit Mouton, which I think was almost better than the Grand Vin. So some people made some terrific wines. Thank you for your attention. Enjoy your break.